everyone, let's talk about real-world applications for solving quadratics by completing the square, aka word problems. Number 1, reaction time. Lauren was eating lunch when she saw her friend Jason approach. The room was crowded and Jason had to lift his tray to avoid obstacles. I'm sure you guys have all been there, done that. Suddenly, a glass on Jason's lunch tray tipped and fell off the tray. Lauren lunged forward and managed to catch the glass just before it hit the ground. The height, h, in feet of the glass t seconds after it was dropped is given by the equation h equals negative 16t squared plus 4.5. Lauren caught the glass when it was 6 inches off the ground. How long was the glass in the air before Lauren caught it? All right, so we're given that the glass was 6 inches off the ground. So that's our h in feet. So 6 inches, if we want h in feet, we know that 6 inches is half a foot. So that would tell us that h is 0.5 because that's half a foot. 6 inches is half a foot. We want it in feet. Now what we're trying to solve for is how long was the glass in the air? So we're trying to find t seconds when h is 0.5. That is what we're looking for. So we're going to use the equation given to us. H equals negative 16t squared plus 0.5. And what we're going to do is we're going to plug 0.5 in for h and solve for t. That's our objective here. Now let's subtract 4.5 from both sides. We end up with negative 4 equals negative 16t squared. Now we don't even really need to complete the square to solve this. We can solve this using the square root property. So of course we're going to do it the easier way. So divide both sides by negative 16 and we end up with t squared equals 1/4. And I just switched them around, all right? Reflexive property. Then we're going to take the square root of both sides. So t equals plus or minus 1/2. All right, because the square root of 1/4 is 1/2. And then we can't forget it plus or minus anytime we're taking the square root of both sides. Now we can't have negative seconds. All right, so we can't have negative half a second. So if we're putting it back into the context of the problem, there's really only one solution. So the glass was in the air before Lauren caught it for half a second. And that's our final answer. All right, number 2, auditorium seating. So the seats in an auditorium are arranged in a square grid pattern. There are 45 rows and 45 columns of chairs. For a special concert, organizers decide to increase seating by adding n rows and n columns to make a square pattern of seating, 45 plus n seats on a side. All right, so just visualizing this, we've got an auditorium, all right, that's in a square, and we know that there's 45 rows and 45 columns of seats, okay? So altogether, that would be 2,225 seats, because 45 times 45. Okay, now how many seats are there after the expansion? What we would want to do is just write this in terms of n, because we don't know how many rows or columns were added. We just know it's 45 plus n for rows and 45 plus n for columns. So if our goal is to just write this in factored or standard form, right now it's in factored form, just multiply it out. So we end up with 2,025 if we're foiling, plus 45n, plus 45n, plus n squared. If we simplify this out and we want it in ax squared plus bx plus c form, we end up with n squared plus 90n plus 2,025. And that would be how many seats there are after the expansion. All right, we just have to write it in terms of n because we don't know what n is. Now, what if n organizers wished to add 1,000 seats? All right, so what we want to do is we want to think of this like a square. All right, so this is kind of the logic and reasoning behind completing the square. So if we started with 45 times 45, and we know that we have 2,025 seats. So if the organizers want to add 1,000 more seats, what that's going to be is our capacity is going to be 3,025, correct? And that actually answers part C as well. All right, so it would be 3,025 seats if they wanted to add 1,000 seats. So what we want to know is, what is this number going to be? How many rows and how many columns is that going to be? And we can actually solve this by completing the square. All right, so if we use our equation that we found in part A, right? N squared plus 90n plus 2,025, all right? That's how many seats that there's going to be after the expansion. And we want this number to be 3,025 because that's how many seats we want after the expansion. We want them to be equivalent, right? Because 3,025 is the same as this in terms of n. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve for n by completing the square. So we can figure out how many rows and columns need to be added, right? We can figure out this n right here, the n that we're adding to the rows and columns, just by solving this, completing the square, all right? So if that wasn't clear enough, right, we want this to be equal to this, right? Because this has to be 3,025 and equal to 3,025, all right? Because that's what we're saying this is. We're saying that this is after our expansion, and we know after our expansion we want 3,025. So we're going to solve by completing the square. First thing we're going to do, is subtract 2,025 from both sides because we want it to be ax squared plus bx equals c. So we end up with n squared plus 90n equals 1,000. Now we're going to solve by completing the square, so we've got to take our b, which is 90, divided by 2 and square it. So we end up with 45 squared, which we know is 2,025. So that's the magic number we're adding to both sides of our equation. So n squared plus 90n plus 2,025 equals 1,000 plus 3,025. All right, now this looks very familiar, like what we just did. Okay, so what we're going to do now is factor this. And we know if we factor this, we end up with n plus 45 squared equals, I made a typo there, right? We're adding 2,025 to both sides, not 3,000. So then we end up with 3,025. Take the square root of both sides. So we get n plus 45 equals plus or minus 55 because the square root of 3,025 is 55. Then we're going to subtract 45 from both sides. So we get n equals 55 minus 45 and n equals negative 55 minus 45. All right, because we've got plus and minus 55. So this gives us 10, and this gives us negative 100. Now we can't add a negative number of rows, so that is not a valid answer in the context of this problem. So therefore, n equals 10, and this is our magic number. So we're going to be adding, if we go back to part B, what is n if organizers want to add 1,000 seats? Well, n is going to be 10. All right, that's our answer to part B. And then if we think about this logically, if we had 55 rows, right, because we're adding 10 to 45 and 55 columns, 55 times 55 is going to give us 3,025, and that's 1,000 more than the 2,025 that we wanted, or that we started with, okay? If you have any questions on this problem, please feel free to raise your hand, call me over, and ask. Otherwise, look to the board to see what to do next, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye.